Old friend, I want to believe the heart of a man still remains within you. So said Flora, the elderly witch, and friend, beloved friend of the Skull Knight, and a question which she posed to him, the infamous and fearsome as well as ambiguous Skull Knight. Is it for someone's sake, perhaps pity from a fellow sufferer or struggler, in reference to the Skull Knight aiding, quote-unquote aiding, Guts or Gutsu, the Black Swordsman, and the infamous struggler, the struggler of his time, in his quest to avenge his fallen brothers of the Band of the Hawk, who were sacrificed by Griffith, their so-called leader. Flora, the witch, ponders to herself whether or not the Skull Knight is aiding or using Guts to get his own revenge against the one called Void. Void, who is the head of the God Hand, and Void is someone who the Skull Knight despises so much, just like Gutsu or Guts despises Griffith. And this is basically yours truly talking about and discussing the parallel and similarities between Guts, the Black Swordsman, and the foe of the Inhumans, the Skull Knight himself. These two guys and gals are so similar in many ways, and the Skull Knight himself long ago has lost his humanity, and Lady Flora, she wonders to herself whether or not he still has a heart within him, the heart of a human. She believes he does, but does he? Who knows whether or not he is using Gutsu or Guts for his own personal gain, his own personal quest to exact revenge on Void for what he has done to him, betraying him and in turn using him, just like he is maybe using Gutsu, and Gutsu or Guts in turn is trying to avenge his fallen brothers, as I've mentioned, by exacting said revenge on Griffith. These two guys and gals, their hatred and want for vengeance is not the only similarity or parallel between the two, the Skull Knight and Guts. It goes far beyond that. Like, the Skull Knight is from a different era, a different period in time, long before the birth of both Guts and Griffith, as well as Casca and their brothers of the Band of the Hawk, from a different era in humanity, in humankind. The Skull Knight was once a king of his own kingdom, and this king, his name is Gaiserek. Gaiserek was once the king of his great kingdom, the same kingdom in which the dungeon of Midland's empire, the main castle of the fallen king of Midland, was built upon. This dungeon contains the corpses and skeleton of the fallen king, Gaiserek, and this king, I believe he is the Skull Knight. It's so obvious, guys and gals, so obvious indeed, because the Skull Knight and Gaiserek, King Gaiserek, share so many similarities in their own right, they do, but the main point is, the Skull Knight, his hatred for Void, it must have been something out of betrayal, a sense of being betrayed by someone you trusted with your life, and that thing is Void. Void was someone who the Skull Knight at one point considered a friend, very much like Gutsu had considered Griffith his friend and brother, supposedly. But now, guys and gals, Guts and Griffith are mortal enemies. The Skull Knight and Void are the same thing. The same hatred exists for the Skull Knight towards Void. He hates Void that much and is willing to sell his very soul, all because of vengeance and hatred for Void. And he vowed none but he shall kill Void, which he will, guys and gals, mark my words, before the end of Berserk, the manga, Miura Kantaro's Berserk. He will be the one to kill Void. He will. But until then, the Skull Knight acts as a sort of guide for the Black Swordsman and his merry band of companions and friends he loves deeply, and where Guts is somewhat conflicted because he's trying to figure out what's more important to him, vengeance or his companions, especially Casca. But the Skull Knight, his one goal in his existence has been vengeance against Void and the God Hand, especially Void. The Skull Knight and Guts in this case are somewhat different, and yet not so different, because deep down, guys and gals, everything that happens in Guts' journey from the Black Swordsman arc up to the Fantasia story arc in Berserk, the manga, it all comes back to Griffith, the White Hawk, his once dear friend and now bitter and mortal enemy, or not so mortal, because Griffith, whatever he became, is a demon, a monster without a soul. Another similarity between the Skull Knight and Guts is the fact that the two of them have constantly and continue to challenge their fates, their predetermined fates, as strugglers who fight, endure, and survive against all odds, all in the name of vengeance. In the case with Gutsu, or Guts, his beloved friends and companions of his merry band, these two, their fates are intertwined with one another, just like Void and Griffith, their fates are intertwined with both Guts and the Skull Knight. The past and present, the present of Guts and the past of the Skull Knight are near identical. They are, guys and gals, especially in regards to the Skull Knight's relationship with Void. Some people, fans of Berserk, have theorized that the Skull Knight was once part of the God Hand, the old God Hand, long before Ubik, Slan, and Conrad. The Skull Knight, along with Void, were once part of the first and old God Hand, but at some point something happened between them that made them go apart or separate. And the Skull Knight, whatever happened once again between them, the bitterness and hatred the Skull Knight bears for Void is so deep and comes from somewhere profound. But guys and gals, I personally believe that the Skull Knight, he had made a deal with the God Hand of old, and because of this deal, his people and soldiers were sacrificed all because of him in the name of power or whatever King Glyceric, aka the Skull Knight's desire was back then, many years ago. And the Skull Knight, his appearance was a result of this deal and the Berserker armor which he had worn long before Gutsu would wear it. He was the first wearer of this armor. He was the God Hand had tricked him and made him take this deal or accept it, and thus the Skull Knight, his anger and hatred for Void and the God Hand had begun. And so many years later, the Skull Knight would encounter Gutsu, who in turn had met Griffith and the Band of the Hawk. Hatred, guys and gals, hatred runs deep, and hatred had consumed the Skull Knight, despite the fact that Flora does believe deep down there is still a heart in him. But once again, who knows, his hatred and rage made him the way he is, an angel of death. Rage or anger and hatred, as well as fate or predetermination and free will, these are two themes which the Skull Knight and Gutsu encapsulates. They do. But one other theory is that Gutsu or Guts is the Skull Knight. This theory is so far-fetched and so out there, but I do believe that there is a connection between these two, considering that Guts and the Skull Knight are fellow strugglers. I don't believe this theory theory holds water, I don't, but regardless, the Skull Knight and Guts are so similar and share many parallels with one another. They do. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like, comment, subscribe if you wish, and do check out my gaming channel where I do Let's Play series, gaming content, and so much more. Until next time, peace out, take care, adios amigos, au revoir, and sayonara.